The training yard of Station Epsilon 7 hummed with the rhythmic clash of combat drills. Kravlor, a towering Vraxian with crimson scales and 4 muscular arms, commanded the space with an authority that made even seasoned warriors hesitate. His reputation as the finest combat instructor in the Galactic Coalition was well earned, brutal, efficient, and utterly unforgiving. Among the trainees stood a human boy, no more than 16 standard years, with dirt-smudged cheeks and defiant eyes. His name was Marcus, and he'd been assigned to Kravlor's advanced combat program through a bureaucratic error no one had bothered to correct. The other trainees, Vraxians, Keltorians, and cybernetically enhanced Ziphrans, towered over him like mountains over a pebble. Again. Kravlor's voice boomed across the yard. "Your stance is weak, human. You dishonor this arena with your presence." Marcus reset his position, sweat dripping down his face. His muscles screamed in protest, but he raised his practice blade once more. The Keltorian opponent across from him, a creature with 6 eyes and reflexes that could track a photon, grinned with predatory anticipation. "My grandpa always said," Marcus panted between breaths, "that strength isn't just in the muscles, it's in the mind." Kravlor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Your grandfather? Some primitive farmer, no doubt, who knew nothing of true combat." "He trained the Emperor's personal guard," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Back during the siege of Kepler 442, Theo Marin. Maybe you've heard of him." The training yard fell silent. Several trainees exchanged uncertain glances. Theo Marin was a legend whispered in military academies across 12 systems, a human mechanic who'd somehow transformed a desperate platoon into the most feared fighting force in Coalition. History Kravlor's scales darkened to a deep burgundy, a Vraxian expression of rage. In 3 thunderous strides, he crossed the distance to Marcus. His primary right hand shot out, striking the boy across the face with enough force to send him sprawling onto the Duracrete floor. "You dare invoke that name?" Kravlor hissed. "You dare claim lineage to a myth while embarrassing yourself in my arena?" "Humans and their pathetic fantasies." Marcus touched his split lip, blood mixing with the dust on his face, but his eyes never wavered. "It's not a fantasy. It's the truth." Kravlor raised his hand again, all 4 arms tensing for a strike that would do more than merely bruise. "That's enough." "Krav." The voice came from the entrance of the training yard, quiet, almost casual, but carrying a weight that made the air itself seem heavier. Every head turned. The man standing in the doorway didn't look impressive at first glance. He wore a grease-stained mechanic's coverall, the kind seen in every ship bay across the galaxy. His hair was more gray than brown, tied back in a practical knot. His hands bore the scars and calluses of someone who'd spent decades working with metal and machinery. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes, held something that made even Kravlor pause. "Theo Marin," the mechanic said, stepping into the yard with unhurried steps. "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd check on my grandson. Seems I arrived at an interesting moment." Kravlor's scales flickered between burgundy and a pale yellow, confusion mixing with residual anger. "The Theo Marin is dead. Killed during the Exodus Wars 20 years ago." "Reports of my death," Theo said with a slight smile, "have been greatly exaggerated. I just prefer fixing ships these days. Quieter work." He glanced at Marcus, who was picking himself up from the ground. "You okay, kid?" Marcus nodded, wiping blood from his mouth. "Yeah, Grandpa. Just getting a typical warm welcome." Theo's gaze shifted back to Kravlor, and something in his expression changed. The casual mechanic vanished, replaced by something ancient and dangerous. "You struck my grandson for telling the truth." "That's unfortunate." Kravlor's pride warred with the growing unease in his gut. "If you truly are Marin, then prove it. Show me the warrior, not this grease-covered imposter." Theo sighed, rolling his shoulders. "I really did hope to avoid this." He looked around the training yard, noting the various weapons on display. His hand settled on a simple training staff, basic, unadorned, balanced. "All right, Krav, you want a demonstration? Let's make it educational for the class." What happened next would be discussed in military academies for generations. Theo didn't move like a young warrior. He didn't need to. Every motion was economical, precise, the result of thousands of hours of experience distilled into pure efficiency. When Kravlor lunged with all 4 arms, a strike that should have been impossible to counter, Theo simply wasn't there. The staff touched two of Kravlor's joints in passing, and suddenly the Vraxian's right arms hung uselessly. "Humans," Theo said conversationally, circling the now limping instructor, "don't have your strength, Krav. We don't have your natural weapons or your armored hides, so we learned to be creative." Kravlor roared and charged again, using his remaining two arms and his powerful tail. Theo stepped inside the attack, the staff becoming a blur. 3 precise strikes, shoulder, knee, and the base of the skull. Kravlor collapsed like a fallen monument. Theo stood over him, not even breathing hard. We learned that every joint is a weakness. Every muscle has a pressure point. Every species, no matter how strong, has vulnerabilities. He extended a hand to the fallen Vraxian, and we learned that true strength is knowing when to use force and when to show mercy. Kravlor, his pride shattered but his eyes clear, took the offered hand. Theo helped him up with surprising gentleness. "The boy wasn't lying," Theo said softly, "and he doesn't belong in your advanced program, not yet. But he will someday, because I'll train him the way I trained the Emperor's Guard, not with brutality but with patience, not with pride but with purpose." He turned to Marcus, tousling the boy's hair. "Come on, kid. Let's get that lip looked at. And maybe I'll tell you some real stories about the siege." As grandfather and grandson walked toward the exit, every trainee in the yard stood at attention, a gesture of respect that Kravlor, despite his throbbing injuries, found himself mirroring. Theo Marin paused at the doorway, glancing back one last time. "Oh, and Krav? The Emperor asked me to send his regards. He never forgot the lessons." Then the mechanic and the teen disappeared into the corridors, leaving behind a training yard forever changed by a truth they'd dismissed as fantasy. That humanity's greatest weapon had never been strength, but the wisdom to turn weakness into victory.